if they decide to fight someone who I think they shouldn't be able to beat, but they happen to pull it off because of a few lucky rolls.
The appeal was not about becoming a lord anymore. It was about who is my character? How awesome is he?
I create a world. Welcome back to another episode with Beas. He's over there, and Buse. He's right here. I'm the guy with the Boba Fetcher. Today, we are going to have another episode regarding...
Hey, Buse.
Paper and Pencil RPG. Yes, sir.
What's the name of our channel?
Blam Blam Truckers, but I cut it out half the time anyways.
Oh! Welcome back to Blam Blam Truckers, folks.
I mean, they can just look at the name underneath.
I like the lead-in. Call me old-fashioned.
Anyways, so today we're going to be talking a bit about our history of RPGs, pen and paper, and once he takes a sip of his glorious copper mug cup of water, I'm going to let Bees take us away.
All right. So we've talked about this in passing a few times, but role-playing games are a happy accident. They were not intended to be created the way that they are in modern day, and that's not just through the natural changes and growth that any game happens over time. You see what works, you see what doesn't, and you emphasize what works. D&D, when it was first created, was not designed to be a storytelling medium. It was designed to be a game where you go into a dungeon and you work your way through the dungeon, exploring it, watching out for traps. Traps were just as deadly, if not deadlier, than your monsters, and looting the dungeon to the best of your ability, whatever the maximum you can carry, and get out, go sell it, and then either go back in that dungeon or go find another dungeon/ruins to explore. That was how they go back and read 1.0. It is available online. It's very easy to find, and I believe it's past its copyright at this point. But anyway, it's online. It's easy to find. You can find all 3 booklets that were the original version of it, and there's nothing in there. There's very little in there about bartering, and that's all about selling your stuff after. You got experience points equal to the amount of gold you were able to acquire through the adventure, which includes what you sell stuff for at the end of the adventure. So it was very much so focused on winning and the goal, and the growth of the character was part of that, but that wasn't how you beat a session. Or winning Dungeons and Dragons was about getting enough money to retire. That's really what it was about. There was even talk about how you would eventually become a lord. And once you were a lord, you could retire and you had your own castle and you were left alone, theoretically, and you had your own passive income from owning land, or actually that would be active income because you're working the land with your people too, and you're managing everything. So it's not really passive income. But that was the goal of D&D, was to go from and you didn't need a background because every character was a lesser child of a noble. You were minor nobility because it's set in medieval Europe in a post-apocalyptic, if you'll indulge me on that description, but medieval Europe was very much so because of environmental factors, but also because of the fall of the Roman Empire and the vacuum that was left in that place that took a long time to fill because of the environmental factors, was very much so in a lot of ways meets the criteria of a post-apocalyptic setting. So you're in medieval Europe. That's the setting. That is the only setting for original D&D, and you're more than a free man, but you're less than a landed noble. So whether you were you were a son who wasn't going, or a daughter who wasn't going to inherit, and it also had mystical elements to it as well. They directly ripped off Tolkien without any question whatsoever. Yeah, you could play a human, a dwarf, or an elf, and that was it. Halflings, hobbits would, I believe, not come in until Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or possibly 2nd edition, which kind of is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, depending on how you look at it. So it gets a little murky, and I was only alive for part of this. Back in the late 80s, early 90s. Dungeons and Dragons came out in 74. So that's what the game was supposed to be. But it grew from that, just from play. And suddenly becoming a lord wasn't everybody's goal anymore. They were much more interested in their characters and the stories and the adventures that they had together than they were with getting loot and becoming a lord and being able to not have to do this anymore. Which is that was the goal. That was the goal of D&D. It was kind of like having a job. How long do I have to work until I can retire? Well, if you hit the lotto, not that long, but otherwise, you got to start figuring out your retirement plan and your 401k, and do you have a pension from this job, and are you filling out an IRA every year, and all of those wonderful things that are part of real life. Now, those factors wouldn't go into D&D, but that was the original goal of original first edition D&D. And role playing and getting experience points for role playing, no, didn't happen. It just didn't. You got experience points for how well you cleaned out a dungeon. It was very much so a game with a goal, and just because there wasn't necessarily a goal every session, like you got a little bit closer to your goal every session. So there was that ongoing aspect to it, but it was not. If you read the books, you'll see what I'm talking about. The booklets, you will see what I'm talking about. Your story didn't matter. What you did mattered. But the more people played these characters and played this game, the appeal was not about becoming a lord anymore. It was about who is my character? How awesome is he? How cool does he or she look? What kind of armor does they wear? Are they as cool as Deathwatch Mando, who's not really in the light here too well? Does your character have two cool blasters and a jetpack, or the super duper sword of singing sword, and the incredible armor of Arthur himself, or whatever you came up with? Was your sword Excalibur? And it delved into all of that mythos of legend and mythology that Tolkien, really delved into when he created the Lord of the Rings world, the setting, the fantasy setting. And there was no setting for the original Dungeons and Dragons. So you played more D&D back in the day, and you read some of the Forgotten Realms. That was one of them.
There's the Dragonlance series. There's Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, that sort of stuff.
Those were all different settings, right?
Yeah, they're different. Dragonlance by Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, is a decent setting that a lot of people use because it's a fairly fleshed out world. So.
How about Drizzt the Dark Elf?
I'm not sure. I only ever listened to a bunch of short stories about him. I never really read the Drizzt series.
Fair enough.
Drizzt series. There were other type of settings, and you could pretty much take most fantasy settings and do a D&D world in it anyways.
That's true.
Even to this day.
D&D was more about the rules than it was about the setting when it first came out. And as people were playing, they started developing their settings and developing their characters, and it became more and more about your character and the story of who your character was. And that's what modern role-playing is today. Even, D&D 5.0, which is turning into D&D 1 or D&D 6, or however you want to put that, D&D Beyond. But one of the things along the way that did that was the D6 system with West End Games when they got the Star Wars, live long and prosper. The Star Wars setting in particular, one of the few books I've ever read for a role-playing manual that talks about how to create a story. What's more important is having fun at the table and telling a fun story that everybody is involved in the creation of. It's not so much about following every single rule, unless that's fun for you guys. If that's fun for you and your group, go for it. Anything you want to add on that?
Killing your roommate is not fun for your story. Just saying. Most of the time.
There's a story there. Tell us a story. Buse.
So, when I was running a Star Wars game back in college. The second year I knew Beas, my second year of college, and I was running a Star Wars game, which Beas was a part of, as well as My roommate.
I know nothing.
Actually,
I see nothing.
multiple roommates. We'll just say to a faulty grasp of physics and probably just being frustrated because I wanted my story to go a specific way. I ended up killing my roommate's
railroads.
character. Or I'm going to stop a guy by hitting the button by shooting at his hand. Okay, the blaster shot shoots through his wrist and his hand still falls and hit the button.
Oh.
My roommate was very, very ticked off at me that night.
I wonder why.
Almost like the time when I had taken out Mrs. Bees in another Star Wars game.
Mrs. Buse. There is no Mrs. Buse.
That's what I meant. I get confused. Yeah, I've talked about this before, but I took out Mrs. Buse in another Star Wars game that was run by a friend of ours. Our friend, the GM, let her survive, but myself and Bees helped convince him that no, there was no possible way she could survive because of the way I described of what I did.
I helped a little at first and then promptly shut myself up.
Yes, but all I take is a little prodding. So when we're talking about it, the GM's wife was looking at me and shaking her head.
Yeah.
Like, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is fine. And my wife had just gotten her character back, too, because her character had been
controlled by a Dark Jedi.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the dungeon crawl and modern day role playing. You've got so many options, and I know a lot of people are just getting back into the hobby or getting into the hobby for the first time, and you don't know about homebrewing or anything like that. And with D&D Beyond, they're trying to standardize everything to the point where homebrewing becomes almost not impossible, but far more difficult because you're interacting with a computer for all of your gear and stuff. I have no interest in that because I homebrew everything. I start with a system and I rework it however I want it to work. I know what I think I know what I like, and then I test it until I'm sure and refine it. You'll see that if you listen to my Transformers D6 series I've been doing, going over the High King's. Oh, there's going to be a link. Going over the High King's D6 homebrew system he created for Transformers back in 2008 and refined all the way up until 2011, which is now 2011. This is being recorded in 2024, so that was 13 years ago.
13 years ago.
Nice baker's dozen of years. And it still works great, as you'll see if you go through the system with me. So after that, but I homebrew off what he did. I homebrew any system I play until I can get it to work the way, tweak it until I can get it to work the way I like. I create my own items if there's going to be items in the game. I don't sit well with rules that I don't agree with. And since I'm running the game, or the GM is running, whoever the GM is, isn't the corporate person who wrote the book, I don't have a problem with that. Remember, if you're having fun, you're doing it right. I wanted to, since the whole D6 thing with Transformers we were doing, I started looking up the new RPG created by Renegade Games for Transformers. It's their Essence 20 system. And I noticed something. So the main thrust we wanted to go for today was comparing the different styles of D&D, not just D&D, of role-playing, and how things sometimes harken back to that. We talked about mission-based versus free-form role-playing. And I'm very into free-form with missions available for people to do, which means I'm going to end up creating more content than my players will ever get to. But it turned out once I got rid of the rails, I created a lot less content than I used to back when I had rails. It's less work for me as the GM.
I agree.
So when he says he agrees, he doesn't mean it's less work for me. It means it's less work in general because he GMs a lot of our stuff too.
Yeah. So for me, I'm someone who comes up with a lot of stuff on the fly, but like Bees was saying, or maybe you didn't say it, but we've talked about it before, I create a world. And while I have stuff I want my characters to do, if they don't, as long as I can get into the general mindset of the villain or important people in that world, if the players do something or don't do something, I just have to think of how this person would react and then go from there. So, hey, if they decide to run away from the big bad instead of fighting him, that's fine. I can figure out whether there's going to be bounty hunters going after them or whatever, assuming it's Star Wars. if they decide to fight someone who I think they shouldn't be able to beat, but they happen to pull it off because of a few lucky rolls, I probably have a second in command somewhere, and it might actually give them somewhat of a reprieve as whatever organization is restructuring, and so I might be able to have I can have other stuff come in. Good example for this was my superhero world, which I had so much stuff built out for that anything they did, I already knew how to react and where to go from there because I knew all of the background, and they never even touched a quarter of the stuff that I created.
So looking over the Essence D20 system, I couldn't help but notice that it is far more mission-based than freeform. As I was telling Buse before we got started, there are no prices for any of the equipment in the Essence 20 system. You do have to roll for it, but it's not like you've been able to save up all this gold to go buy, or currency, I should say, because it's not always gold, but you've been able to save up all this currency to go and buy the gear that you've been wanting for a while. That's not in the game system at all. You can get better and better until you can get to the weapon you want, but that's about leveling your character. There's no rules for that. I don't think bargain is even one of the skills. I'd have to go back and reread it or check the wiki. I've been getting a lot of this from the wiki. I'm not paying $60 for a hardcover book for a game I'm not going to get a group to play with me. It's an expense I just don't need right now. So I'm looking at the wiki and watching reviews on YouTube. But it very much so reminded me of harkening back to that original part of the game where you're there to complete a mission. It's not as free form. It's not letting you get out into the weirdness of wherever you want to be and doing the kind of things you want to do in the setting. And the main setting and it's not the only setting. If you're creative, you can create your own setting. But the main setting for the Transformers game that Renegade put out is Earth, and you're under the command of Optimus Prime. You're an Autobot. And they did put out a Decepticon book and how to play as a Decepticon. And while they added a lot of different skills and abilities and things like that, they call them, I got it up here, roles, focuses, origins, influences, and perks. You don't actually have a class or a race, per se. Well, that's all. They added some stuff, but the game is basically, the setting is the same. You're pretty much on Earth. And maybe you could do a Cybertronian setting, but it's the same basic thing. You're part of either the Autobot army or the Decepticon. What should we call the Decepticon? I don't want to use army again. Horde, maybe?
For the Horde.
For the Horde. For the Alliance. So yeah, it's very much so going back to that. And I see aspects of that, less of that in D&D these days. In D&D, it's fairly freeform, but you have to know the world. Like you can't, if you don't know what's available, you can't just say, I want to do this, whatever. I want to go see the blacksmith. If you don't know that you need to go to a blacksmith to improve your armor, you can't say that. One of the nice things about the game we've been playing in, the superhero game, is it's set in modern day Earth. Right now we're on June 9th of 2023 in Miami, Florida. And while world events are slowly starting to change because of our characters, it is still the same basic setting as the real world 2023 in Miami, Florida on June 9th. Hopefully,
one day I hope we get to June 10th.
We probably should. You guys, I hit you guys with an event at the end of the day on the 6 o'clock news. We're at 6 o'clock on June 9th. And I don't know why you guys haven't called each other yet to talk about what you just found out. But that's how freeform it is. They spent all of June 9th dealing with trying to rescue the new super that they've found out about, the flame guy, Alejandro Alvarez, who's a character I literally made up on the fly with the idea that this would be cool and he'd be captured. And with the way the game was flowing at that point, I knew he'd be captured immediately by the FBI/Feds/CIA/whoever was in the bar, because I had 2 agents in the bar where his powers get exposed for the very first time and causes some death and destruction by accident and gets brought in by them, immediately arrested by them. And I'm like, now they'll know there's other supers out there. That was the only point I was driving at is, hey, there's other supers out there. And they're starting to come out. That was the only plot point I was trying to get across with Alejandro Alvarez. And my
But
players,
Crenshaw wanted to rescue him, and
my
we
players went
eventually
heroic.
agreed.
Yeah, that's why we gave Crenshaw that extra point the other day, that
Yep.
extra character point, experience point, whatever you want to call it. So Alejandro almost got rescued. Might still get rescued if you guys decide to do a daring night raid. That's up to you guys.
I was going to say, I was actually laughing because for anybody out there who listens to Tom Cardy and the song Perception Check, I was just thinking, for the story that we've been working on for 15 days game time and 5 days of our actual lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was thinking, like, well, more 15 days of our actual life and like 5 hours of game time. That's what it feels like at this point.
We got interrupted by the eclipse, and then one of our players was on vacation. That difference between mission-based versus freeform, your game system is going to allow you to do that or not allow you to do that. Like Call of Cthulhu or Chithulu or however you pronounce that is very much so mission-oriented. It's on the mission side of the spectrum, not the freeform side of the spectrum. D&D is more freeform, kind of. D6 is very freeform. Point where their adventures did not sell as well as they were hoping they were going to because people didn't need them as much. People made up their own adventures. And there was not rules, but guidelines on how to create your own adventure in second edition revised and expanded, which again are the best set of guidelines I'd ever seen for that. Highly recommended for GMs to go and read that. Maybe we should just read it on air one of these days. I don't have much more to say about this. Anything you want to add?
Your players or your group, if you are just a player and have no desire to ever run a game, everything's different. And your group of players might be the type that prefers to have everything on rails. Because I know I haven't played with that many of the groups like this. We tend to all want to do our own thing. I've played with players, but not with groups who prefer it. But I know Bees has played with groups who prefer rails, where they are pretty much like, tell me what to do, give me a mission. Military style games work really good for that. So if you're in a, regardless of the setting, as if it's in a military setting, you're great. But if you have people who are much more creative and such like that, they're quickly going to get bored with mission type games. And if an entire system is built around a mission type game, they're probably not going to enjoy it. But play around with stuff like that. If you, and I said this before, I will say it again, find a local gaming shop. If you are interested in stuff like this, find a local gaming shop. See if you can sit in on one of the games, even if you don't want to play. Just take it all in. See different types. Talk to the DM or GM, Dungeon Master, Game Master, pretty much same thing. And ask them, what type of games do they run? Are they more freeform, or do they tend to keep things more on rails? And what has been their experience with both? You can get a lot of great information from players because, like we said before, both of us are in our 40s. I know I look like a fresh-faced teenage boy, but
Believe that, I got a bridge to sell you.
but a lot of people have been playing for years. Heck, even if they are a fresh-faced teenager boy who's running the game, they very well could have been playing for years. I know people who played D&D since they were 5 or 8 years old. Talk to them. Get
Our
ideas.
buddy the Doughboy.
That's true.
He
true.
started his kids on D&D, well, not D&D, but on role-playing games when they were very young.
Yeah. But
the other thing to consider in all of this is you want a system like an umbrella. It is better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So if you're playing Essence 20 and you get a group of people who can't stand Rails, and you're going to figure that out in your group, and you're playing Essence 20 and they want to go off the rails and do their own thing and leave planet Earth and go take a space bridge to wherever and start bumming around the galaxy of this dystopia in the wake of the destruction of the Cybertronian Empire. They're not going to be able to do that without you having to create rules for all of this and come up with roles for all of this on the fly or in between sessions. That's a lot of work for you. A system that's going to allow them, that is built around being more freeform like that, is going to help you as the person running the game do all that stuff. So bear that in mind while you're picking what system to play with. And systems change, man. They change over time. They can grow. You can add stuff into them. One of the great things about the Essence 20 that I really appreciate, so they have 4 games in the Essence 20 system right now. I've looked really good at Transformers. I've looked okay at G.I. Joe, which is the second one. The third one is Power Rangers, which was actually the first one that they put out. So in chronological order, they put out Power Rangers, G.I. Joe, then Transformers, and then their fourth game, My Little Pony.
I'm noticing a theme here.
All of them are owned by Hasbro.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why they didn't just have Wizards of the Coast do it, but whatever. Sometimes it's just easier to have it licensed out. And all of those games can be played together. They all use the same system. Okay, that's actually pretty cool. Though the system for combiners, for Gestalt combiners and Transformers is different than the system for forming a Megazord. Yeah, Zord. Megazord. We're a little too old for Power Rangers. No offense. No offense intended, anyway. I would have loved it if I was a little bit younger when it came out. I did try and watch it, but the original series was not designed for me at that point.
No, but I had a crush on the
Amy Jo
second
Johnson?
Pink Ranger.
The what?
No, the second Pink Ranger.
Second Pink Ranger. I know there's a second Pink Ranger. I didn't stick around that long. I know she was in the Power Rangers movie, if that helps at all. So, look for a system that works for you guys. D&D is quite versatile. It's really hard to get out of the current setting with the way 5.0 is run.
But look at Pathfinder too. Pathfinder is based. Yeah, it's based off of the 3.0, 3.5 D&D, and there is a ton of stuff out there. People are still putting out books under the Pathfinder system. A lot of these types of settings, especially if you're willing to just modify it a little bit, you can do. I know that there's superhero stuff out there. I know that there is. Pretty sure there's probably some sort, if not Transformers, some sort of robot stuff out there. You can go through and change. You can modify stuff, and you don't even have to modify too much. You could probably look online and find stuff other people have done. You don't have to create everything from whole cloth. But the Pathfinder system is one that we have played before. I enjoyed it because, well, I started off with the first D&D game I ever played was 3.0. And so, since it's based kind of off of that, and there's just a ton of books out there. Heck, World of Warcraft, not World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft was a separate game, but Warcraft had put out its own books based in that system.
So did World of Warcraft.
Or
was that a new system that used a D20
World of Warcraft die? was a different system.
Based around a D20.
Yes. But it was slightly different.
Because our friend who plays John, he had the books back when he lived at many, many years ago. When I would go and visit, I would read those books and be like, "This is awesome." So before the Death Knight came out, what was that expansion? The Wrath of the Lich King.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading through about runes and how powerful they were, and it was all stuff that was in the role-playing game book. And that was it. It wasn't you couldn't find it in the World of Warcraft game, really. It might have been mentioned in passing. And you couldn't find it in the actual Warcraft games, 1 and 2 and 3, because it wasn't in there. Maybe in 3. I didn't play all the way through 3. Played most of the way through it. But I don't think it was in there. And yeah, that whole rune system was outlined very well in the World of Warcraft. or maybe it was the Warcraft, I don't know, but the role-playing game book. And I'm reading through it, and I'm like, this right here, and the min-maxer in me popped out and said, "Hi, how you doing? Let's see how I can break this." And that was the system I was looking at. That I'm like, and I'm just reading this to fall asleep because it was when I'm hanging out with my friends, I'm actually talking to them, crazy as that may be. So they would go to bed, and I was working nights at the time, so I would have to stay up later, and I was like, "Ooh, books I don't have," and I'd read through them. I was pretty sure that would be my first avenue of attack for trying to break the game or building something that nobody saw coming.
Nice. I might see if John has those available. I'd like to read it if he still has them. I've got the Warcraft ones, or a couple of the Warcraft ones, not the World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft ones. Did you have the rune guy in it? The monks and whatnot? No. Then yeah, it was the World of Warcraft books I was reading.
Mine didn't even have gnomes in it because it was based off of Warcraft, which gnomes hadn't been. I believe gnomes weren't in there because they didn't get introduced until Warcraft 3. Was it Warcraft 2? Okay.
The gnomish flying machine.
Right. So maybe they were in there. There was something that wasn't in there yet.
They weren't major characters. They just had the flying machines. All right, truckers. Okay. We'll see you guys later. I hope you enjoyed this conversation we had here. Keep on trucking, you blam blam truckers.